tune? Is it Cantor Nini?
Yeah, I do have a typical kind of formatting that I've given myself away on my lyric
That's
sheet. So you
great.
can.
That's great. You're well
So this
branded.
is from Shir Yaakov's Psalms project. I don't know if he is still continuing. I've only been able to find his stuff through Psalm 68, but since it's going to be quite some time until we get to Psalm 68, we still have material to work with until then. So this is his setting of two verses from Psalm 10. And I would encourage you all at some point to go watch the video that he posted about it, because he talked about the occasional challenge of cherry picking verses for these kinds of chants and picking verses out of context, and assigning new meaning to them that conflict with what they might mean in context. So he had to really work on reinterpreting this for himself in order for it to work. Also, he translates anavim as the humble, which I would also accept. I'm still really fascinated by the difference between anavut and aniut. So maybe that's something that we could discuss at some point, because I'm struggling with the distinctions. All right, but this is Kuma Havaya. Kuma Havaya El Nisayadecha Al Tishkach Al Tishkach Anavim Kuma Havaya El Nisayadecha Al Tishkach Anavim Havaya Melech Olam Vaed Avdu Goyim Me'artzo Havaya Melech Olam Vaed Avdu Goyim Me'artzo Kuma Havaya El Nitzayadecha Al Tishkach Anavim Havaya Melech Olam Vaed Avdu Goyim Me'artzo Havaya Melech Olam Vaed Avdu Goyim Me'artzo Kuma Havaya El Nisayadecha Al Tishkach Anavim.
How beautiful. Thank you, Cantor Nimi. You have such exquisite taste. We are so lucky. All of our musical offerers are such a gift to us.
So, Rabbi, if I could just take a second with two housekeeping issues before we start. It's wonderful. I'm seeing some new people in the class, and I just want to repeat that we have an email list for the class where we keep in touch with people and we send out materials, and we have a Facebook page. If there's anyone here who is not getting the emails from the class yet, you can private chat me in chat your email, and I will put you right on the list. And associated with that, we have made a decision, having seen the number of people who have posted on Facebook their personal offerings for Psalm 10 and for Psalm 137, that if you send those to Annika, as you have for all of your other offerings, we're going to be putting them together in a PDF and sharing them next week so that everybody gets to feel that their offerings have been heard and respected. We are not going to be sharing them in class at this point. We may be sharing them in class later. So let's set a deadline of Sunday evening for Sunday at 5 for any Psalm 10 or Psalm 137 offerings. We will format them and we will send them to everybody on that mailing list so you get a full collection. And back to you, Rabbi.
All right. So we return to our Psalm 10 study. We're going to keep moving through line by line, still having a bit of that synesthetic experience, seeing a translation, hearing another, to try to break open some of our initial assumptions about what a word might mean and investigating when we've got questions. So we usually default to a Hebrew reader being one of our Hebrew native speakers in the class, Yael Bat Chava, Ben Shafran, but neither of them are here today, friends. So I am wondering if anybody else would like to be our Hebrew reader. I love hearing the texture of many voices over time. I get a little sick of the sound of my own voice. And this is just going to be me complimenting several people on their Hebrew, not obligating them to read. But if anybody would like to, I know that Saul's Hebrew is beautiful, so is Sloane's. I saw Margot here, who also is a beautiful Hebrew reader. And of course, we have some clergy in the room, all of whom have lots of experience reading Hebrew.
I'm waiting for the first hand to go up. I'm in participants. Someone can do this.
Or we can trade off. Sarah Siegel, great. And then Saul, wonderful. Maybe we'll go line by line or trade off. I'll kind of allow Harold to keep track. But anybody, Kita Aleph, who wants to take a crack and name some of the letters that you're seeing in the lines that we're studying. This is a great Hebrew reading opportunity. Wonderful. So what we're doing again today is I am going to share my screen. I'm going to bring up the Safaria page. I want us all to get really fluid at using that page so that in these next 2 weeks when you're in your own study, you feel very confident about your ability to ask questions, discover your own answers, and know all of the tools at your disposal. And Harold will be the voice of Robert Alter in this production. So let me share my screen. And then Sarah Siegel is going to read our first line. And then I believe Saul Zalkin will. Nope.
And then Sarah Sloan volunteered.
And Sarah Sloan. Wonderful. 3 people. That's really nice. Okay. This should be it. No, it keeps bringing me to my Zoom page. Are people seeing my Psalm 10 here?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. It kept bringing me to that Zoom. How was your meeting? I don't know yet. It's only just started. Okay.
Okay.
So we will, first we're going to just hear the alternate translations of JPS and of Alter. And then Sarah will read us in with verse 6, which is where we left off yesterday. So beginning with verse 1, why, O Adonai, do you stand aloof, heedless in times of trouble?
Why do you stand far off, O Lord? Turn away in times of distress.
The wicked in their arrogance hounds the lowly. May they be caught in the schemes they devise.
In the wicked man's pride, he pursues the poor, but is caught in the schemes he devised.
The wicked crows about their unbridled lusts. The grasping person reviles and scorns Adonai.
For the wicked did vaunt in his very lust, grasping for gain, cursed, blasphemed the Lord.
The wicked, arrogant as they are in all their scheming, thinks, God does not call to account. God doesn't care.
The wicked sought not in his towering wrath, quote, there is no God, quote, in all his schemes.
The wicked's ways prosper at all times. Your judgments are far beyond them. They snort at all their foes.
His ways are uncertain in every hour. Your judgments are high above him. All his foes he inflames.
So I love in particular the way that we hear 2 very different messages in the way that Alter translates and the way that JPS translates. I mean, look at the word prosper. And if I double click on just that word, twist, whirl, dance about, everybody is, somewhat metaphorically translating this. And remember that we have this very embodied word of yafiach, which Alter translates as inflame, but also has this very illustrative quality. Ben yesterday said it's like when you are blowing on a dandelion and the seeds go everywhere. And that's how we know that the wicked person, at least in this verse, is really angry. All right. So now it is Sarah Siegel's turn. Please.
Okay, Amar bilibo bal emot lidor vador asher lo vira.
Excellent. Beautiful reading. So that wicked person thinks, I shall not be shaken. For all times, never be in trouble. And Harold, what does Alter have to say? And are there any notes?
He said in his heart, I will not stumble. For all time, I will not come to harm. And the note is, for I will not come to harm. The Hebrew, literally, that is not in harm or evil, is crabbed and unclear.
Mm. um, that is not in harm or evil. And this is the way that JPS has translated it all the time, never be in trouble. So it really vexes the translator, who is also the interpreter, to make some sense of this Hebrew. Does anybody have any comments or questions, or want to offer their own interpretation before we move on to verse 7?
I am watching for hands. Please put up your hand if you would like to contribute. I don't see any hands at this point, Rabbi.
Great, we'll move on and we can come back if necessary. So Saul was our next reader, and then Sarah Sloan after that. Saul, let's hear verse 7.
Ala pihu male umirmot v'toch tachat no amal va'aben.
Gorgeous. The wicked one, their mouth is full of oaths, deceit and fraud, mischief and evil are under their tongue.
His mouth is full of oaths. Beneath his tongue are guile and deceit, mischief and misdeed.
So we see in translation, the syntax of Hebrew is very, very different than that of English. I don't think it's strange to move those clauses of the sentence around a little bit. And actually, it's a fairly close translation. But Harold, can you say the altar one more time, please?
His mouth is full of oaths. Beneath his tongue are guile and deceit, mischief and misdeed.
And you can see the under their tongue is these two words right here. It is pretty close to the end of the sentence in the Hebrew, but it isn't the last thing, and it isn't the immediate next thing after their mouth is full of oaths. So this was one, when we were doing our general overview of the psalm, that really triggered a lot of response. People were seeing some resonance into our own time and our own atmosphere in which we're living. Anybody have any?
No, I think people are enjoying this back and forth.
All right. But certainly, I'm thinking of, I think it might have been Saul. There was a whole minion of people who were going to be reciting Psalm 10 every day because it was so appropriate to what they were feeling and, frankly, what we're hearing all around us.
Rabbi, as a matter of fact, Lori Krotman just asked you to click on the word that is translated as mischief to see what other synonyms might work for that word.
Sure. Okay. So here we go. Double, double toil and trouble, and also mischief.
Great, thank you.
Amal the Aven, more trouble and sorrow, wickedness. So I'd say that like where we're getting mischief from is really what I thought, which is Amal.
Great.
And Saul had a word to say about the relevance of the psalm today, I would guess.
Yes, only that I have been doing that every day, and I've been doing what you've been doing in taking out the he's and making it days, and it makes it even more meaningful.
Any reason as to why?
I don't know, but when I did it the first time, I thought, oh my God, how absolutely perfect, because it's more than one person.
Yes.
More than one person in this time. I'm not going to come up with a list, but more than one person.
For sure. So friends, Saul has revealed to us a very deep Jewish secret, and I would wager a very deep secret of faith and religion, no matter what it is, which is when you commit to a ritual, first of all, you never know what you're going to find. And second of all, it is the simple repetition of the act that gives you the opportunity to discover deeper meaning. And so rituals in their initial adoption might feel really significant all of a sudden, or might not. And you got to stick with it, just like anything that we practice at, whether that is the speaking of a new language, or the playing of a new instrument, or the learning of any new skill. It takes some time. So I encourage you to stick with it, because your relationship to it will change over time. And I love the way that Saul described, once we move it from the singular to the non-binary, at least, whether it is plural, collective, because we have that opportunity in English, the psalm may open up to us. Thank you. Shall we move on? I don't know why my it keeps jumping back up, but we always know where we are. So Sarah Sloan was next to read, unless there's anybody who wanted to go in between and say something or ask something.
No hands.
Great. Sarah, please, verse 8.
יושב במערוב חצרים במסתרים יהרוג נקי עיניו לחלקה יצפנו.
Beautiful. And again, thank you to Sarah, Saul, and Sarah, all of our S readers who are diving in and bringing the Hebrew to life for us today. And if anybody else wants to try, raise your hand, put your name in the chat. All levels are welcome. It's a really nice Hebrew exercise. So what Sarah read says, they lurk in outlying places. From a covert, they slay the innocent. Their eyes spy out the hapless. Harold, what does Alter have to say?
Well, there's one word that Alter agrees on, which is covert. He waits in ambush in a sheltered place. From a covert, he kills the blameless. For the wretched, his eyes look out.
Here we go. This is the lurking kind of confused me, which was going to be the covert in the JPS translation. Harold, would you say one more time? I wasn't paying such close attention.
He waits in ambush in a sheltered place. From a covert, he kills the blameless. For the wretched, his eyes look out.
Okay, so we see a little bit of the switching of syntax. And I would say that Alter is pretty much sticking with synonyms so far. But, lovely expressive synonyms that bring us more of a fullness of the sentence. Any questions or comments?
Well, I will say that Sarah Kleinbaum has offered to read a line.
Wonderful. Excellent. Sarah, will you, every time I hit the X, we go back. But here we are at verse 9. So Sarah Kleinbaum.
Ye'erov ba'nistar ka'ar ye visko ye'erov l'cha sof ani yachtov ani b'mashcho berishto. I hope I read it correctly.
Yes, you did. Gorgeous. The only thing that I want to point out is this word is pretty familiar to us, right? Sukkot, and it sounds like sukkah. And this is the repetition of the word ani that Cantor Nimi is wondering about, because it's got such interpretive possibility. Here are all of the different definitions that Safari is giving us for this. So think about ani when we, and sometimes there's a kamatz katon and it's oni, but I have not seen Safari as kamatz katon be any different when I'm looking at kol, which is usually the word that I reach for to say, should I pronounce this kamatz as an a or an o? Let's keep an eye out for it, the next kol or the next word we know should have a kamatz katon in it. But for the moment, I'm going to pronounce it as ani, having any other information to lead me to pronounce it oni. So after all of that, the wicked, they wait in the covert like a lion, Aryeh, which is Larry Finkelstein's Hebrew name, who waits like a lion in their lair, waits to seize the lowly. They seize the lowly as they pull their net shut.
So Alter agrees on 3 words here: covert, lion, and net. Otherwise, he's different. He lies in wait in a covert like a lion in his lair, lies in wait to snatch up the poor, snatch the poor as he pulls with his net, and has a note as he pulls with his net. At this point, the poet abandons the lion simile and represents the evildoer as a human schemer lying in wait with a net to entangle his victim.
So I think Alter's just bothered by the idea that someone would try to catch a lion in a net, which I agree is probably not the most effective way.
I actually think that he's noticing that a lion would not use a net to catch the poor.
Very true, very true. A personified metaphor.
Right.
Who's going to use a net? Not a lion.
First, it's the lion waiting in his lair to catch somebody, and then it's back to the man or the person who's lying in wait to snatch the poor in a net.
Mm-hmm. All right. What kinds of responses do we have to this line?
We have no hands.
I see
Sarah
Saul's.
Sloan, I'm sorry, Sarah Sloan, the Jewish Study Bible, has an interesting note on covert. Do you want to share that with us?
Yeah, I'll read it. The emphasis is on covert places. The wicked are not seen in their activities and cannot be punished by human courts, so the psalmist needs to call on God.
Very interesting and also extremely resonant for this moment. Our frustration sometimes with human courts. I saw
there are some hands up. Cantor, Nimi, and then Saul, and then Jeffrey have their hands up.
Lovely, thank you.
So I was setting the mixed metaphor aside for a moment. I was looking up the root for that word ani or anav in other verses, and it seems that they actually do have essentially the same root letters, because the third root letter being a yud versus a vav are really comparable. And if you look at their translations in Brown Driver Briggs, that you see poor, humble, lowly, afflicted, and there's a lot of overlap in meaning between the two words. I think that the nuance that I'm sensing, and I would love maybe your opinion, Rabbi Rapport, or others, is that aniyut, this word here in this verse, ani, seems to be when lowliness is imposed upon the person who is lowly, as opposed to anav, which is when somebody takes lowliness upon themselves, like as in humility.
Wow.
So, like being afflicted is ani, where the lowliness is imposed upon you, as opposed to anavut, where you actually take it upon yourself. And I don't know, I would love to, when we get our Hebrew speakers, our native Hebrew speakers back in the room, I would love to know if that's the sense of it in modern Hebrew.
That is just gorgeous. I love that idea. And again, like this psalm has so much to say about our time. What does it mean for each of us who has imposed loneliness, isolation upon ourselves? What does it mean for each of us when isolation is imposed upon us by an outside force or agent? I am going to, Jacob was looking in the book that is included in the app that I referenced for everybody. And one of the things I'm going to be checking is what is the verbal, so this is the noun, but like in context, could we understand the verbal forms around it as causative or as just simply active? And I wonder if that'll give us any further insight. But for now, we will call on some of our hands that are raised, please.
Saul?
Okay, so in verse 8 and 9, the translators use the word covert, but the Hebrew is different, right? In verse 9, he's using, the psalmist is saying bamistar, and it's not a covert. See, because my translation says, wait, I'll find it. He lurks in hiding, just in hiding, which a covert is a place.
Yeah. Well, okay, so this is we see a repetition of mistak in a couple places. You're right, it's not the only word that's used. Right, let's say ream. So these are like courtyards that are hidden. And maybe that's where they get the one word translation of covert from. But Saul, you're right. And this root within both of the words, we're seeing it in the singular here and the plural here, it's reference to God much of the time. You know, God is in hiding.
Uh-huh.
Is
God
that the
hides
same
God's
as
face.
Al-Tastir? Is that the
Yes.
same root? Okay.
Yes. All right. But Saul, tell us again what translation you're using, because it's really helpful to hear all these voices.
I'm using Art Scroll, not interlinear, it's page to page.
All right. Harold, who else has something to say?
Well, I would just, I looked up covert because their technical meaning of covert in English is a thicket in which game can hide. So this is interesting because if it's just in Hebrew from tastir, which is a hiding place, both of our translators are using the place that animals hide, a covert.
Sure. And you saw the parallel between, you know, how the wicked is like a lion who
Right.
is stalking their prey, and how they are like a person who is entrapping in a net.
Jeffrey Weiss has a hand up.
I would say that last line has so much, I was resonating with it. I was just thinking about if you substitute those words for the Republicans or McConnell, I was just thinking about this in particular with the HEROES Act and with the trying to extend the Unemployment Act. They don't want to do it. This feels like it's talking to them.
Pulling the net shut.
Yes, on the poor people.
The safety net.
Yes.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Beautiful.
Robin Baslaw was the next hand.
So I too was thinking about it in terms of the constant vigilance that's required for paying attention to tyranny and disease like COVID and addiction also, that these things just lie in wait doing push-ups for when we're not paying attention. So that's what made me think of.
What an extraordinary metaphor.
Wow.
That it's the wicked are lying in wait, doing push-ups so they're ready. And what does that mean if Timothy Snyder and Masha Gessen are our modern day psalmist, reminding us to keep our eyes open and giving language to it? Love that, Robin. Thank you.
Joan Friedman has her hand up.
Yes, so I'm looking at Richard Levy's translation and notes, and he makes a point that I'm going to paraphrase in order to change it a little bit, which is that the fact that Sukkah can mean the lion's lair, or it can mean the Sukkah of Sukkot, the protective booth, it relates to the fact that this is what wickedness can do. When you something that is protective and safe and happy can be, it gets turned into danger and harm by wickedness.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, think of the power of this word in not just Hebrew language, but like Jewish language. When we think of a sukkah, when we think of the holiday of Sukkot, when we think of the words of Hashgivenu, that beautiful prayer for protection that we utter in the evening, that we should be in a Sukkat Shlomecha, our immediate connotation, at least for me, with this word is one of safety in a positive connotation, and how truly nefarious to turn this word from a place of protection and safety into, you know, a very scary image where we are vulnerable.
Oh.
Very interesting. Any more, Harold?
That is it for that verse.
All right. And again, you know, friends, we can always return. So I'm going to close this, scroll back down to verse 10. And unless there was another volunteer, and I'm so grateful, all of our volunteers of all levels, this is the way we get better at Hebrew, by reading it and by reading it out loud, which is scary and which is hard, but that's where you really hear yourself and somebody else can hear you and help correct a little bit. So Sarah Siegel, unless there are any other brave volunteers.
I'm not seeing anyone.
So Sarah Siegel for this one, and brave volunteers, keep thinking about it. So Sarah's going to read this word in the brackets. Remember, because the vowels of this word are a little uncertain. Here's our best guess. See how Cantor Nimi said, of the word ani, and the word anav, this last letter, the yud, could also be very easily replaced with a vav. Could be as simple as a typographical error. Look at, if I put my cursor over the vav, how easily it turns into a yud if you don't give it a long enough tail, which is why writing, when you're learning Hebrew, even if you only plan on typing Hebrew ever, writing is a really helpful learning tool. Kinesthetically, it connects all the pieces in your brain. And also, these are two weak letters. So when we think of Scott's description of Yud He Vav He as the weak lettered name, Yud and Vav can pretty easily fall out when you're moving words from different tenses and different verbal forms. All that is to say, Sarah, I hope I gave you a little bit of time to look over the verse before I made you read it. So whenever you're ready.
Yidke Yashoach v'nafal ba'atzumav chel kaim.
Gorgeous. Thank you. Notice how Sarah was really carefully reading what's in the brackets, and you can see a pretty dramatic difference here, that we've got a singular versus a plural. We know it's a plural because it ends in yud mem sofit, yud final mem, but when reading it out loud, the Masoretic text says it just doesn't make sense unless you read it like this, and you have to even insert another word to make it make sense. So the wicked person, they stoop, they crouch, and the hapless prey fall to their might.
Well, there's quite a little conflict here, because Alter says that the first part, he translates the first part, the lowly bow down.
Ooh.
And in his second verse it is, and the wretched fall into his traps, with quite an interesting note that we will have to parse out a little. The lowly, instead of the enigmatic vidke, which is what we have as the first word in the text, or the yidke, which the Masoretic notation that Kerry recommends, and we'll get back to that. He says his translation assumes the original reading was either nidke or vikach, either of which means the lowly. So if you do that, the first part is doesn't refer to the person stooping, it refers to the lowly. And Rabbi, if you could just explain to us again how in the received text, we cannot change what's written, for instance, in the Torah scroll, but we can say that it doesn't make sense to read it like that. So we have what we read versus what we see, and how in a text like this you see it, but those of us who read from the Torah have to at times know that there is an alternative way that word should be read, should be vocalized.
Absolutely. Really well explained, Harold. Thank you so much. So to move back to a couple of Alter's points. So this word as it stands is not so clear. We've got to vocalize it. We've got to say it out loud differently. We all do want to be kind of in agreement about what we do. So we usually go with the Masoretes, who say it's not a vav, it's a yud. It's a mini vav. What if, Alter says, it's not a vav, it's a nun? So for my Kita Aleph friends, here's a nun, and you can see that it's still got the same basic body shape of a vav, but it's got that bottom floor. And what if it's a typographical error that somebody just didn't put the floor in on their nun? That's no good, but people imagine the scribbles that we see people writing. Oh, here's a nun much, much closer if you'd rather look within the same line. And I think even within what I read, it could be, I was interpreting it as the wicked, they stoop, they crouch, and the hapless prey fall to their might. But I think a very fair reading, and maybe even a fairer reading, could be the ani, or the Harold. What was the other? There was.
He says the lowly bow down.
Yeah. So it could be the lowly. It could be the wicked. It's very interesting.
And Rabbi, two more things. If you go to that last word, actually, it's all of the vowels just separated into two words.
Yes, we've got the consonant
right.
of
the human consonants, but it's the same consonants.
Chet, si chet. Lamed, si lamed. Yud, you can't really depend on the yud. They may show up, they may not. They're one of those people who responds maybe on RSVPs. Then we move kaf. If it starts the word, it is a kaf. If it was in the middle of the word, like here, it would be a chaf. Rabbi Kleinbaum talked about beged kefet, those letters that take a dagesh, a dot, when they start a word. But Harold's totally right. Chet, chet, lamed, lamed, kaf, kaf. Kaf, aleph, aleph, and even yud, yud, mem, mem. So what if you didn't read this as one word? What if there just wasn't a clear enough space between them?
Rabbi, do you think you could take just a second? You used the word the Masoretes, Masorah, and Masoretic text. Who or what were the Masoretes?
So this is a great question that will take us all the way to 1045 if you let me spin out on it. So I will say that this is the inherited text. And perhaps one of our intrepid scholars, there are lots and lots of people who have studied the idea of the Masoretic text over time at CBST, with CBST. And if somebody wants to put in their favorite article that they can find about it in a quick Google search that tells the story better than I can in this very shorthand form, put it in the chat, put it on the Facebook group, ask Mia Rothstein, who is great at giving this definition in like 2 minutes, where I'll be here for the next 20 minutes, and so will we.
I will just point out that it is very important in these studies as to when we refer to the Masoretic text. And I will say that I always go to Wikipedia first, which always has a very interesting article. And also that Lori Krotman has her hand up.
All right.
Yes, I was just reading the Norman Fisher interpretation, and it's one of the few places where he really takes it. He says, he crouches, he bends down low to deceive them, and they are deceived by his deceptions. And I think it takes a little more responsibility on the lowly for being deceived. That's how I saw it.
Oh, very interesting. Are we blaming the victim in that translation, or are we saying that like it's on you to fact check? I'll use that as an example, like whose responsibility is it not to be deceived? But what I can say for the moment is that Fisher was agreeing with my initial reading that the subject here is the wicked and not the lowly, the poor, the humble. And my hope is that tomorrow we can take a bunch of these translations side by side and look at all of them together once we're really solid on the text itself. All right.
We have a question from Deborah Riva. Why are we pushing aside that vav and saying the vav can't be a vav?
Oh, well, we're not saying that the vav can't be a vav. We just don't have any good answers if it is a true vav.
Okay, and Sharon,
so the possibility is always open. And if Deborah or anybody else over time had a good vowel collection that they could put into this word that would require the vav to stay exactly as it is, then that's a completely legitimate reading. However, most of the translations we're seeing see it as a weak letter, see it as a letter that's pretty easily changeable, and that's why they rush to be like, what if it's a yud? What if it's a nun?
And Jeffrey Weiss said that he would take a shot at reading the Hebrew.
All right, Jeffrey, let's do verse 11. Good choice.
All right, do you hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, okay. Amar,
yep.
Amar, I'm sorry. Belibo,
yep.
Shachach.
Nice.
Ale.
Mm-hmm.
Hatziter.
He's tier. See these chirik e vowels.
Okay.
Good.
Panan.
Panav, yes.
Panan. Oh, vav, I'm sorry. Baal.
Yep. Good job.
Raha. Linscha.
Wonderful, Jeffrey. I am so proud of you. Hooray! All right. Amar Balibo. So the subject again, we could interpret, but I'm pretty confident. The wicked says in their heart, El, God, is not mindful. God hides God's face. This is the word that histir with these two chiriks, same root that that Saul was asking about earlier. God hides God's face. God never looks.
Alter says, he said in his heart, God has forgotten, has hidden his face, never more to see.
So shachach, I could see that as forgot pretty easily. Let's see if yep, yep. Could be ignore, could be stop caring. It's very interesting. Any responses to this line that Jeffrey read?
Well, first of all, there's several people saying, good work, Jeffrey.
Yay.
And then let's see. Judy Hollander, do you want to share your thought that you just posted?
Yeah, I'm not sure where it fits, but but it's something that's been bothering me forever, so you guys can be my therapist. When we say that you never challenge the victim, you never say anything, the victim's always the victim. And I'm using victim because I don't have the one who the thing happened to, okay?
Right.
Forget the word. Where and how do we fit in responsibility for things that happen to us versus just saying, you know, I'm going to say it, I'm a woman and I'm afraid, you know, a taller man intimidates me or something like that. You know, with the Me Too movement as well as with a lot of things, it's to me not as clear cut as the banners and the posters make it. And it also does not provide for an opportunity for personal agency. And so I, you know, somebody can jump all over me, but
and frankly, Judy, you were smart to say it at 10:42. No one's going to jump all over you because we're almost done here.
Oh, well, they know where I am.
But so Judy,
I support
back
that.
at verse 10, Lori brought in that really interesting translation from Fisher, which I then interpreted, you know, whose responsibility is it not to fall prey to the wicked? Is it, you know, do you have to be held accountable for your own behavior that might lead you into the path of the wicked? Is the wicked out to get you and you're a victim in this? And Judy's saying that we have that question all the time in our modern day. So I would love to push us to verse 12 because that is one of the lines that Cantor Nimi is singing in our Sing Out. So is there somebody who could read for us? Next in my batting order, unless somebody jumps in, would be Saul. But all right. Actually, you know what, Cantor Nimi, would you read this line? Because this is one of the Kuma lines that you've been seeing with interpretive possibility.
Sure, and I kind of see this also as like a pivot verse because it really responds to what's been coming previously.
Yeah.
Kuma Adonai, el nisa yadecha, al tishkach anavim.
Rise, O Adonai, strike at the wicked, O God. Do not forget the lowly, the poor, the humble. And Harold, how does Alter read this verse?
The Alter is pretty much on the same page here. Rise, O Lord, raise your hand, forget not the lowly.
And that's a very close translation of Nisa Yadecha. And you can see the word yad in there that we use as a pointer for reading Torah. Lift your hand. And I love the way that Cantor Nimi read this. You know, this verse 11. So verse 10, as Judy pointed out, is pretty controversial. Verse 11 is narrating the wicked one's thoughts, but is the wicked person the only one who thinks that? You know, I've seen in so many of our creative interpretive translations and the poetry that we write, where is God? Why does God hide God's face? Why does God stand aloof? This is something that maybe we have said out loud with a question mark or as a statement, just as the character in the psalm does today. And so Cantor Nimi is saying that this is a very powerful response to verse 11. Rise up, Adonai, don't forget the Anavim. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to hand it over to Cantor Nimi.
I'm going to do the announcement again, just in case people weren't here for the beginning. We've seen a lot of posting on Facebook of offerings from Psalm 10 and Psalm 137. We are going to collect those and put them in a PDF and send them out to the class, since we won't be sharing them in class for the near future. So anyone who has something, send it to Annika. Sunday is the deadline. And also, just a show of hands, I'm going to, since we've been working so closely with these translations and Alter has such interesting notes, who actually has a copy? Just raise your hand. Who has bought a copy of Alter at this point and has them with? Okay, so many people, wonderful. But just for those people who don't have it, I'm going to send out again the scan of Alter, Levi, Fisher, and Bernstein for this psalm, because I think that Rabbi is going to be going back and forth from some of the translations, and it's nice to have them in front of us. And with those notes, and the note that if you're not getting the emails, please put your email to me in chat. We will share the screen, and Cantor Nimi will sing us out as soon as I open his text. Hold on just a second here. Okay. Tricky, tricky, tricky. All right, here we go, Cantor.
Okay. By the way, this is I loved also. I would again encourage you all to go watch Shir Yaakov's video. He says that he uses E minor chords specifically because he calls E minor the humblest of guitar chords.
Whoa, isn't E minor the key of the Jews?
I always thought it was D minor, but in any case, it's
No, you're the Cantor. You're right. Forget I said anything.
quite all right. Quite all right.
D minor, D minor.
All right.
But E minor only requires 2 fingers, so he calls it the humblest of guitar chords.
There's nothing to repeat.
Kumavaya El Nisayadecha Kumavaya El Nisayadecha Al tishkach Hanavim Havaya melech olam va'ed Avdu goyim me'artzo Havaya melech olam va'ed Avdu goyim me'artzo Kuma Havaya El Nitzayadecha Al tishkach Anavim Umavaya El Nisayadecha Al tishkach Anavim.
Wow.
What a fabulous bookend to our study today, to be able to end on that verse. I love it. Tomorrow we're going to continue with our line by line. There are only 18 verses in the psalm, and some of them are just brimming with interpretive possibility that we want to talk out really carefully. But my hope is that we can get through all of the lines tomorrow, and that would save Thursday for an opportunity for us to think about, is this a continuation of Psalm 9, looking especially at the acrostic, and maybe bringing in a couple other translations, interpretations of how this psalm is read and how this psalm is rendered into English by some of our favorite authors. So thank you so much, everybody, especially to our brave Hebrew readers for bringing other voices to the speaking of this ancient text and bringing it to life. I am so appreciative of being a nachshon, of jumping into the sea, even when it's like up to your chin, up to your nose. And it was such a pleasure to hear your voices.